back at it. Yet another video, man. Hoping to inspire some thought. You know what I mean? Create some gears turning in the brain, man. That we may see the devils amongst us and learn to submit to our Elohim, right? Our King, the King of Kings, creator of all things, including your dreams, right? Hallelujah, hallelujah. All right, man. I'm at. Well, first of all, as you can see, but I'm gonna, introductions, right? So we were talking about radiocarbon dating, right? And if you know anything about radiocarbon dating, I guess the biggest thing about it would be that they use it to, support millions of billions of years of Earth, right? And if you get into your word, your Bible, you will see that there's a direct contradiction there, right? The Bible supports or dictates a young Earth, right? Maybe anywhere from 6 to 10,000 years old, right? Carbon dating, in science, they say millions of billions of years, and the theory of evolution and all that jazz, right? So me, trying to get to the bottom of things. I feel like the Bible has nothing to be scared of, right? I feel like we grow in our faith when we're willing to ask the questions no one wants answered, right? It gives you strength because you find that our Abba, man, our Father, he is grand, and he is here. He exists, man. The more you know, the more it's not even about faith, bro. It's logic. Like he's here, right? He's omnipresent. He's omniscient, right? Which means omniscient means always, right? He's always present, and the word always has two connotations. It means everywhere and all the time. Hallelujah. So I think he actually encourages such matters, because the Bible talks about how it's to the honor of a king to hide a matter, but it's I believe it's the honor, it's the esteem of the lowercase king, of course, but of man to search it out, right? It gives you a crown, right? And it makes it's cool because he is unsearchable. So some things have to be deeper than surface level, because then you find that he's grand, right? But I digress, right? Today we're talking about radiocarbon dating and their inaccuracies, right? So I've been scouring the web, because you'll find a lot of pros and a lot of cons in any subject you look into today, because you have a lot of bias on both sides, right? So my bias, but I try not to be biased when I present these things. So we're at this article, right? Science Day, and the source is Cornell University, and I believe we're going to get the man that actually typed it up, I believe, towards the end. So just bear with me. We're going to dive right in, right? Radiocarbon dating is a key tool archaeologists use to determine the age of plants and objects made with organic material, right? But new research shows that commonly accepted radiocarbon dating standards can miss the mark, calling into question historical timelines. Okay, cool. Reading on. Archaeologist Stuart Manning, there he is, and colleagues have revealed variations in the radiocarbon cycle at certain periods of time, affecting frequently cited standards used in archaeological and historical research relevant to the southern Levant region. And yeah, actually that's going to be a sidebar for me. What is that, right? I'm sure someone knows. Feel free to comment on the matter. Help me out, you feel me? But yeah, which includes Israel, southern Jordan, and Egypt. These variations of offsets of up to 20 years in the collaboration of precise radiocarbon dating could be related to climatic conditions. Manning, professor of archaeology at Cornell University, at Cornell University, and director of Cornell Tree Ring Laboratory, is the lead author of Fluctuating Radiocarbon Offset Observed in the Southern Levant and Implications of Archaeological Chronological Debates, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. So, pre-modern radiocarbon chronologies, I hate that word, I really do. rely on standardized northern and southern hemisphere collaboration curves to obtain calendar dates from organic material. These standards collaboration curves assume that at any given time radiocarbon levels are similar and stable everywhere across each hemisphere. Right. So note that. We have another article to look into. Actually, I'm gonna say that now. We do have another article to look into. So this is kind of like the foundation, right? This is so everything I'm reading, just keep into mind. Of course, that's the point of the video. But this is step one, and then we have a step two, right? The Cornell-led team questioned these assumptions. We went looking to test the assumptions behind the whole field of radiocarbon dating. Manning said, "We know from atmospheric measurements over the last 50 years that radiocarbon levels vary through the year." So that's important because, as you'll see in the other article, or I think it might even mention it in here for a bit, because it's not the longest article, but it does touch on some things, right? But radiocarbon levels vary, right? They're not consistent. They haven't been consistent since the beginning of time. That is very, very important. And we also know that plants typically grow at different times in different parts of the northern hemisphere. So we wonder whether the radiocarbon levels relevant to dating organic material might also vary from different areas, and whether this might affect archaeological dating. Which, I want to say kudos to these people for even being open-minded enough to tackle that thing, because I know in the society we live in today, being comfortable is the tradition, and you don't get to talk about the elephant in the room, right, without being the bad guy. You don't get to do good without being viewed as evil, right? That's where we live. This is what it is. It's reprobate. Isaiah talked about how woe to them that call bitter for sweet, right? That's where we at. So the author measures a series of carbon-14 ages in southern Jordan tree rings with established calendar dates between 1610 and 1940 AD, right? They found that contemporary plant material growing in the southern Levant shows an average offset in radiocarbon age of about 19 years compared to the current northern hemisphere standard collaboration curve. So he's saying that it's off, right? Either way, either one hemisphere is showing more than the other or vice versa. It's not consistent, and therefore, we're seeing the inconsistencies, right? Manning noted that scholars working on the early Iron Age and biblical, I hate the word, chronology, there you go, hallelujah, in Jordan and Israel are doing sophisticated projects with radiocarbon age analysis, which argue for very precise findings. This then becomes the timeline of history, but our work indicates that it is arguable their fundamental basis is faulty. They are using a collaboration curve that is not accurate for this region. Right. Applying their results to previously published chronologies, the researchers show how even the relatively small offsets they observe can shift calendar dates by enough to alter ongoing archaeological, historical, and paleoclimate debates. Right? It's important. All this is important. I'm reading it for a reason, right? Keep it in mind. There has been much debate for several decades among scholars arguing for different chronologies, sometimes only decades to a century apart, each with major historical implications, and yet these studies may all be inaccurate since they are using the wrong radiocarbon information, Manning said. Our work, he added, should prompt a round of revision and rethinking for the timeline of the archaeology and early history of the southern Levant through the early biblical period. Why is it important that he's mentioning the southern Levant? I want to look into that word just to know more about what that is exactly, but I'm going to say it means hemisphere off the hip, right? But we understand that that's the cradle of civilization. So, you know what I mean? To be to measure carbon today and say that that's the carbon of yesterday, what he just presented to you is whoa, right? It's major, right? Epic, right? But like I said, keep that in mind. Not gonna go too far because, like I said, I'm in another article, and this one's is Answers in Genesis. Why are we here? Because these people are awesome, bro. They're real good about looking at both sides of the spectrum. Of course, they're just as biased as I am as far as, you know, our love for the word, but their love for the word, just like mine is warranted on truth. They deal with facts, right? And they're not scared to ask the questions, right? And to do the research and to look into the thing, right? So, you know, kudos to these people, by the way. May Yahuwah bless them, right? But rock them, Abba, please. They do good work. But we're right here, and it says, doesn't carbon-14 dating disprove the Bible, right? Let's see. Let's look at it, man. And keep what we read in this one in mind, and we're going to see the similarities, and you know, we're going to try to draw some lines and get some assumptions going, and like I say, hope to inspire your own digging, right? Let's do it, man. We're in an age of information, bro, and this internet could be a tool for good or a tool for evil, and I feel like, you know, those with good trees and good fruits shall use it for good things, and I can't see it being used for any better thing than to point out the devil, right? That we may highlight our Abba, our Father, God, Yahuwah, right? Scientists use a technique called radiometric dating to estimate the age of rocks, fossils, and the earth. Many people have been led to believe that radiometric dating methods have proved the earth to be billions of years old. This has caused many in the church to reevaluate the biblical creation account, specifically the meaning of the word day in Genesis 1, with our focus on one particular form of radiometric dating, carbon dating. We will see that carbon dating strongly supports a young earth. Note that contrary to a popular misconception, carbon dating is not used to date rocks at billions of years old. Right? So off the rip, you know, they lied. You know, it's a misconception, right? They're misleading us, right? And even what they're using carbon dating for, right? But the basics. Before we get into the details of how radiometric dating methods are used, we need to review some preliminary concepts from chemistry, right? Let's build a foundation, right? Because being that this is a scientific topic, it's going to have some scientific words, and we're going to need some scientific foundation, right? A lot of us haven't dealt with this stuff in years. Atoms, protons, electrons, you know what I mean? All that chill out, right? So recall that atoms are basic building blocks of matter, right? Atoms are made up of much smaller particles called protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and neutrons make up the center nucleus of the atom, and the electrons form shells around the nucleus, right? And they have an image here, of course. Nice little picture, right? The number of protons in the nucleus of the atom determines the element. For example, all carbon atoms have 6 protons. I say protons. All atoms of nitrogen have 7 protons, and all oxygen atoms have 8 protons. The number of neutrons in the nucleus can vary in any given type. So the protons are usually the unchanging, but the neutrons are the fluctuating, right? And we'll see that more and more as we get into the article. That's important, right? That's why they put it there. So a carbon atom might have 6 neutrons or 7 or possibly 8, but it will always have 6 protons, right? An isotope is any of several different forms of an element, each having different numbers of neutrons. The illustration below shows the 3 isotopes of carbon, right? So some isotopes of certain elements are unstable. They can spontaneously change into another kind of atom in a process called radioactive decay. Since this process presently happens at a known measured rate, scientists attempt to use it like a clock, right? So this is where you get the foundation of the carbon dating method, right? To tell how long a rock or fossil formed. There are two main applications for radiometric dating. One is for potentially dating fossils, once living things, using carbon-14 dating, and the other is for dating rocks and the age of the Earth using uranium, potassium, and other radioactive atoms. Okay. Carbon-14 dating, right? Carbon-14, or 14C, also referred to as a radiocarbon, is claimed to be a reliable dating method for determining the age of fossils up to 50,000 years to 60,000 years old. If this claim is true, the biblical account of the young Earth about 6,000 years is in question, since 14C dates of tens of thousands of years. Since 14C dates of tens of thousands of years are common, right? Keep in mind, last article we just read said that it varies within 50 years, right? It actually varies within the year, and it actually varies between hemisphere to hemisphere, right? There's a lot of variations, right? So to say that this, to believe that science has cracked the code and has this measuring stick is already false, right? It's a little mushy, bro. It feels a little squishy, right? But we're going to keep reading. We're going to keep going. When a scientist's interpretation of data does not match the clear meaning of the text in the Bible, we should never reinterpret the Bible. That's a gem in itself. That's a gem in itself, right? I'm going to read it again. When a scientist's interpretation of data does not match the clear meaning of the text in the Bible, we should never reinterpret the Bible. And ditto that for history and encyclopedias and all that, right? If the information does not coincide with the Bible, we should not question the Bible. We should question the information. Yeah, boy. So, God Yahuwah knows just what he meant to say, and his understanding of science is infallible, right? Beyond me. Whereas ours is fallible, finite, iffy at best, right? So we should never think it necessary to modify his word. Genesis 1 defines the days of creation to be literal days. A number with the word day always means a normal day in the Old Testament or first covenant, and the phrase evening and morning further defines the days as literal days, right? Which is a whole lesson in itself. It's a whole message in itself. And understand it says evening and morning was the first day, second day, right? Hallelujah. Since the Bible is the inspired word of Yah, we should examine the validity and the standard interpretation of 14C dating by asking several questions. Question number 1. Is the explanation of data derived from empirical observational science or an interpretation of past events, historical science? So observational science is basically science where you were there, you saw it for yourself, right? This is undoubtedly what happened. I seen it with my own two eyes. I am a witness, and these group of people vouch for it with me, right? That's observational science. Past history or historical science is basically you're basing it off an assumption of any rubric or foundation that you'll build off today. So you'll be like, man, well, today the sky is blue, so historically the sky was blue, right? Type stuff. But you can't prove it because you wasn't there, right? Sky could have very well been green in Mesopotamia. You never know, right? The Bible doesn't say. Nobody knows. They didn't have pictures of Kodaks, none of that, right? Or at least it hasn't. They may have, very well have, but that's something else. That's a whole nother kid and caboodle, right? But anyway, as to stay on topic, it's easy to get off track, man. So much information, so much, man. So many reasons to praise his name, man. And all roads lead to Yahuwah, man, for real. But question number 2. Are there any assumptions involved in the dating method? Right? So are they dealing with facts? Or are they dealing with opinions, right? Are the dates provided by 14C dating consistent with what we observe? Right? That's important. Keeping in mind the last article, which I already told us it wasn't. But we're just keeping in mind, we're just building the case, right? That's all we're doing. Can't hurt anything to know, right? Do all scientists accept the 14C dating method as reliable and accurate, which the last article dictated that the community itself is not in agreement on this matter, and the truth seekers of that community is actually calling for a rehaul on the whole doctrine of carbon dating. All radiometric dating methods use scientific procedures in the present to interpret what has happened in the past. The procedures used are not necessarily in question. The interpretation of past events is in question, right? So we understand you could use 14C to date a thing, right? It's just how you reading that data, right? The secular evolutionary worldview interprets the universe and world to be billions of years old. The Bible teaches a young universe and earth, which worldview does science support? Can carbon-14 dating help solve the mystery of which worldview is more accurate? So, hallelujah. The use of carbon-14 dating is often misunderstood, right? Carbon-14 is mostly used to date once living things, organic material. It cannot be used directly to date rocks. However, it can potentially be used to put time constraints on some inorganic materials such as diamonds. Diamonds could contain carbon-14 because of the rapid rate of decay of 14C. It can only give dates in the thousands of year range and not millions. Right? Understand what he just told you. There's no way they could date the world millions of years old because 14C don't last that long. It would long have decayed if it was millions of years old. It wouldn't be there. It would be non-existent. So if it was non-existent, then you'll have to say, okay, boom. Actually, it's going to show you a chart in the raw about, how fast the rate of decay, right, for 14C. So keep that in mind, though. You can't go millions of years old if you're using 14C as your carbon dating method because it decays, it goes away, and it doesn't range millions of years. So this is all just stuff to consider, folks. You gotta, the facts speak for themselves, right? There are 3 different naturally occurring variations of isotopes, right? You have 12C, 13C, 14C, and we read up top. I think it's going to touch into that, but we read up top that the difference of them is not the proton but the neutrons, right? So C12 has 6 neutrons, hence 12C, right? And then so on and so forth. 7 neutrons, 8 neutrons. Carbon-14, oh, my bad, people. Carbon-14 is used for dating because it is unstable radioactivity, whereas 12C and 13C are stable, right? They don't 12 and 13 don't decay. Radioactive means that 14C will decay, emit radiation. Over time, it becomes a different element. During this process, called beta decay, a neutron in the 14C atom will be converted into a proton by losing 1 neutron and gaining 1 proton, right? 14C is changed into nitrogen 14N with 7 protons, 7 neutrons, right? If 14C is consistently decaying, will the Earth eventually run out of 14C? The answer is no, right? So yeah, that's a good question because as I just told you that 14C decays, right? So how does it still exist today if it decays and I'm telling you it can't measure tomorrow? Good question, right? Here it is. Carbon-14 is constantly being added to the atmosphere. Cosmic rays from the firmament, which contain high levels of energy, bombard the Earth's upper atmosphere. This cosmic ray collides with atoms in the atmosphere and can cause them to come apart. Excuse me. Neutrons that come from these fragmented atoms collide with 14N atoms. The atmosphere is made mostly of nitrogen and oxygen, right? That's what we breathe, and convert them into 14C atoms. The neutrons is accepted and a proton is ejected from the nucleus. So we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon. Basic 3rd grade knowledge, right? Once 14C is produced, it combines with oxygen in the atmosphere, and 12C behaves like 14C and also combines with oxygen to form carbon dioxide. Because CO2 gets incorporated into plants, plant food, right? We know about all that, right? The sun, carbon, make plant grow. Yeah. Which means the food, hold on. The food we eat contains 14C and 12C. All living things should have the same ratio of 14C and 12C in them as in the air we breathe, right? We all feed off each other. It's beautiful how he made it, man. It's the intricacies and how wonderfully everything is woven, bro. Man can't do that, bro. There's no way this was haphazard, and there's no way man could be God. If man is God, go make your own earth. Go make your own heaven. You can't. That's why you're trying to live forever here, which is beyond me. Because if you want to live forever, just be righteous, and he promises us a forever. It's crazy, but you know, that's another topic as well, right? How the carbon-14 dating process works. Once a living thing dies, the dating process begins, right? So, as long as an organism is alive, it will continue to take in 14C. However, when it dies, it will stop. Okay? Since 14C is radioactive, decays into 14N, the amount of 14C in a dead organism gets less and less over time, right? We understand that at this point. Therefore, part of the dating process involves measuring the amount of 14C that remains after some has been lost, right? So that's the process. Scientists now use a device called a assimilator mass spectrometer, AMS, to determine the ratio of 14C to 12C, which increases the assumed accuracy to about 80,000 years, right? Keep in mind, it varies within 50, but they're saying they can measure, oh man, we done got better at this, bro. We can measure from, what used to be 50,000 to 80,000. Keeping in mind that the world tells us that the world, we can give it a variation between 6 to 10,000 years old. So they're saying you can date the world beyond that at this point, right? Like, we see the inconsistency. So right now it's a fight. Who's going to win, right? In order to actually do the dating, other things need to be known. Two such things, including the following question: how fast does 14C decay, and what is the starting amount of 14C in the creature when it dies? Two very fundamental questions, right? You have to be able to answer that to be able to make a rubric or a measuring stick for this matter, right? So, one question can be answered very simply. The decay rate of radioactive elements is described in the terms of half-life. The half-life of an atom is the amount of time it takes for the half of the atom in a sample to decay, right? The half-life of 14C is 5,730 years. For example, a jar starting with all 14C atoms at time 0 will contain half of 14C atoms and half of the neutron, the 14N atoms, at the end of 5,730 years, right? At the end of 11,460 years, which is 2 times 2, 5,730, the jar will contain 1/4 of 14C atoms and 3/4 of 14N. So that's why they say the half-life, right? Because if you double the time, it doesn't double the amount it take over. It goes in quarters. So half-life. You get it? Since the half-life of 14C is known, how fast it decays, right? We can measure that. The only part left to determine is the starting amount of the 14C in the fossil. Okay, so we can use observational science to see how long this stuff lasts, right? But the problem is they're going to have to use historical science to figure out how much was in a thing, right? Can they do it? If scientists know the original amount of 14C in a creature when it dies, then it can measure the current amount and then calculate how many years how many half-lives have passed, right? And thereby dating the item, thereby dating the Earth, because the item can't exist without the Earth, right? I can see what they're trying to build here, but there's a but, right? Since no one was there to measure the amount of 14C, right? They're going to have to use historical science here. When a creature died, science needs to find a method to determine how much 14C has decayed, right? To this, scientists used main isotope carbon called carbon-12, because remember that carbon-12 is stable. Read it there, stable isotope of carbon. It will remain constant. However, the amount of 14C will decrease after a creature dies. All living things take in carbon, right? We just read that. You breathe, and then you let it go. You breathe, you let it go, right? All living things take in carbon from eating and breathing. Therefore, the ratio of 14C and 12C in living creatures will be the same as in the atmosphere, right? Because if we're all living off each other, we should all contain the same amount of carbon, being that when we breathe, we feed the air carbon, the plants eat the carbon, we eat the plants, right? Circle. It's a circle. Intricate. Beyond me, right? Hallelujah. Therefore, I think I read that. Yeah. I'm here now. This ratio turns out to be about 1 14C atom for every 1 trillion 12C atoms, right? Scientists can use this ratio to help determine the starting amount of 14C, can't they? Right? You know, it seems pretty cool if it didn't vary, right? See, they want you to believe that this is structured and it goes straight line, right? But it doesn't. So, as you can see, matter of fact, I like this picture. So we can measure the half-life, right? We can tell you how long it takes the 14C to decay. We can even tell you how much 14C something has when it dies today, right? The problem with that is you can't tell how much 14C started in the past. Why is that, right? That's a good question. So this is a chart showing, breaking down the half-life structure, right? How much the 12C, the 14C, and then, you know, the half-life structure shows the neutrons, and then this here is the ratio of the 14C and the 12C half-lives, and then the times that pass, depending on how many half-lives has passed, right? That's the whole chart. But we went through that. I hope we have an understanding of that at this point, right? Hallelujah. A critical assumption. A critical assumption used in carbon-14 dating has to do with this ratio. It is assumed that the ratio of 14C to 12C in the atmosphere has always been the same as it is today, right? Which is, well, we go back to the chart, question mark, right? Can they tell this, right? This is the big question, because if they can tell this, done bun. I can see that they think that they have a measuring stick. It would still matter how they evaluate the data and all that good stuff, but I can see the measuring stick, right? So let's get it in. If this assumption is true, then the AMS 14C dating method is valid up to about 80,000 years. Beyond this number, the instruments science used would not be able to detect enough remaining 14C to be useful in age estimates. This is a critical assumption in the dating process. If this assumption is not true, then the method will give inaccurate dates. Right? They need that, bro. They gotta be able to tell how much was in the past. What could cause this ratio to change? If the production rate of 14C in the atmosphere is not equal to the removal rate, mostly through decay, this ratio will change. Right? So if the atmosphere at some point is now producing less 14C than it used to be, then if we come back today and say, okay, this is how much we have, so this is how much they must have had. Give me 1 second. I need to plug in my, okay, get my charger in my laptop. Then this is how much they must have had, right? Well, again, we see that it varies within 50 years, let alone millions of years, 80,000 years, we ain't even gotta go to millions, just 80,000, 50,000 years, right? Where am I at? What could cause this ratio to change? I think I am here. I'm sorry. I'm here. Right? In other words, the amount of 14C being produced in the atmosphere must equal the amount being removed to be in a steady state, also called equilibrium. Right? So, yeah. If this is not true, the ratio of 14C to 12C is not constant, which would make knowing the starting amount of 14C in a specimen difficult or impossible to accurately determine. Right? So now we're at a doctor, bro. I know people like doctors, PhDs, and all that degrees and all the study, right? They read books we don't know how to read because they got special eyes, right? We can't look at information and make a rational decision for ourselves and what's logical and what's factual, right? But you know, I'm sorry, I'm being so sarcastic. I just hate the fact that we only accept information if it comes from somebody that we consider smart because they got a lot of paper on the wall. Like, why? But anyway, facts are facts, people, right? Dr. Willard Libby, the founder of the carbon-14 dating method, assumed this ratio to be constant. He assumed it to be constant, by the way. So, all that talk about that doctor is basically for this, bro. Like, he's a doctor, right? So you would be like, oh, well, he must know because he's a doctor. He's studied and did this, right? Well, his reasoning was based on a belief in evolution. And if you know anything about the theory of evolution, you understand that it's false, bro, and it's racist as hell. It's racist. And if you know anything about genetics, then it shows you that the theory of evolution is based on bitter being sweet, right? Because they use the purest of the humans are at the bottom of the chart, and those furthest away from being pure humans are at the top of the chart, right? Because of things such as RH negative blood and all that, right? Whole nother topic. But the theory of evolution itself should call anybody that believes in that is using way more faith than I am in believing in the word in our creator, right? That's just what it is. But we're gonna touch into that. I think this article goes into it a bit, so we just gonna, you know, we're gonna read on. Which assumes the earth must be billions of years old. Assumptions in the scientific community are extremely important. Assumptions, right? Hypothetical, what they call it? Hypothesis, right? Educated guesses. Assumptions. If the starting assumption is false, all the calculations based on that assumption might be correct, but still give a wrong conclusion, right? So the data, they might add up the data in a way that it still shows a number, right? They can get some numbers, but then that data is false based off the foundation, right? The foundation isn't true, therefore everything that you get from that foundation won't be true. You get it? Like, they know that 14C exists, but they're using it to date the world in a wrong way, being that they're using it in a bias, like, you know, they're being biased in their approach in the matter. They're trying to build a wall around, you know, like they're trying to build the house without the foundation, and then they're trying to come and put the foundation under the house after the house is built instead of foundation up, right? So it's kind of flawed, but we're gonna keep going. The assumption might be correct, but still give a wrong conclusion, right? In Dr. Libby's original work, he noted that the atmosphere did not appear to be in equilibrium. That's interesting in itself. This was a troubling idea for Dr. Libby, since he believed the world was billions of years old and enough time had passed to achieve equilibrium, right? So off the rip, you can see his conflict of interest, right? Dr. Libby's calculations showed that if the Earth started with no 14C in the atmosphere, it would take up to 30,000 years to build up a steady state, equilibrium, right? So again, the theory of evolution says that, you know, we started with nothing and then matter started creating matter, even though there's nobody can prove that today. Matter doesn't just create more matter, right? Actually, matter breaks down, right? It decays. It goes. We're losing every time we procreate. We get further and further away from the purity of Adam, right? That's a direct slug at the theory of evolution. But let's go. If the cosmic radiation has remained at its present intensity for 20 to 30,000 years, and if the carbon reservoir has not changed appreciably in time, and there exists at the present time a complete balance between the rate of disintegration and radiocarbon atoms and the rate of assimilation of new radiocarbon atoms for all material in the life cycle, right? Dr. Libby, though, chose to ignore this discrepancy, a non-equilibrium state. He just said, forget the fact that it varies. I don't want it to vary, so it doesn't vary, right? And he attributed to an experimental error, right? That's just the machines I was using is off, not the information I'm seeing is factual, but my calculator broke, right? The discrepancy has turned out to be very real. The ratio of 14C and 12C is not constant. Important. That's a fact. I don't feel like reading the small print, bro. I don't. What does this mean? If it takes about 30,000 years to reach equilibrium and 14C is still out of equilibrium, then maybe the Earth is not very old. Message. Anyway, magnetic field of the Earth. Other factors can affect the production rate of 14C in the atmosphere. The Earth has a magnetic field around it, which helps protect us from harmful radiation from outer space. And okay, cool. This magnetic field is decaying, getting weaker. The stronger the field is around the Earth, the fewer the number of cosmic rays that are able to reach the atmosphere. This will be a smaller production of 14C in the atmosphere of the Earth. Right? Okay. We could take that with a grain of salt. It is what it is. There's about, we have spectrums when it comes to that type of talk, right? So we're going to go to Genesis flood. Or I should read this right here. If the production rate of 14C in the atmosphere was less than the past, dates given using the carbon-14 method would incorrectly assume that more 14C had decayed out of a specimen than what has actually occurred. This would result in giving older dates than the true age, right? So, if at some point the Earth is producing more or less 14C than we are seeing today, then, or we're going to have to say more, right? If they're doing more today, and then keeping in mind the half-life chart, right? 5,000 years. So if we see something today and it has this many 14C according to the 14N, or in variation of the 14N, then you will automatically give it an older date, being that it has more or less 14C today. You know what I mean? Depending, because if today we have this much 14C and we're seeing that it decayed from this much 14C, then obviously it's looking at this old, right? But if the 14C in that object from the past is, in variation to the 14C we're seeing today, then there's no way you can use that measuring stick today to date the past. You know what I mean? And that's pretty much the whole point in the article, really. Or, that's the nugget you can take from this. We can't even date. You can't date the past. We don't have a measuring stick. So you can't say, oh, it's this many years old because we're looking at the rocks or the fossil fuels or the fossils or what have you, right? Impossible. Can't do it. But let's look at this Genesis flood, right? I love the Genesis flood because it's one thing that the world itself, cultures around history, can agree upon. There was a deluge, right? Hallelujah. That's Bible, boy. What you mean, huh? What role might the Genesis flood have played in the amount of carbon? The flood would have buried large amounts of carbon from living organisms, plant and animals, to form today's fossil fuels, coal, oil, etc. The amount of fossil fuels indicated there must have been a vastly larger quantity of vegetation existent prior to the flood than exists today. This means that the biosphere just prior to the flood might have had 500 times more carbon in living organisms than today. This would further dilute the amount of 14C and cause the 14C-12C ratio to be smaller than today. If that were the case and the C14 were distributed uniformly throughout the biosphere and the total amount of biosphere C were, for example, 500 times than that of today's world, the resulting C14-C12 ratio would be 1 to 500 of today's levels. When the flood is taken into account along with the decay of the magnetic field, it is reasonable to believe that the assumption of equilibrium is a false assumption. Right. I keep beating the dead horse, but yeah, the numbers are not the same as they vary. It's not that you can't use today to measure yesterday. You can't. Because of this false assumption, any age estimate using 14C prior to the flood will give much older dates than the true age. Pre-flood material would be dated at perhaps 10 times the true age. Right. So being that there was more carbon on Earth and the flood trapped it, it locked it in, because that's how you make a fossil, right? It's alive and it dies quickly and it's given area to preserve, and it makes a fossil. That's how you make fossils. So if you're using fossils to date this, you're going to have to understand that it has more than what we'll see today, and therefore off the rip you're going to get 10 times more than you would get by using today's measurements, right? The rate group findings, right? In 1997, an 8-year research project was started to investigate the age of the Earth. The group was called the Rate Group, Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth. The team of scientists included Larry Verneman, PhD, Russell Humphreys, PhD, Eugene Chaffin, PhD, John Baumgartner, PhD, Donald Young, PhD, Stephen Austin, PhD, Andrew Snelling, Stephen Boyd, PhD. Right. The objective was to gather data commonly ignored and censored by evolution standards of dating. So these are the PhDs you like, bro. Boys, some truthers, bro. You know what I mean? Yeah, they got a moral compass in them that I can respect. That's for sure, right? So they're just looking at the facts, right? I'm not telling them to be biased about the facts. Give me the facts, right? The scientists reviewed the assumptions and procedures used in the estimating the ages of rocks and fossils. The results of the carbon-14 dating demonstrated serious problems for long geological ages. For example, a series of fossilized wood samples that conveniently have been dated according to their host strata to be from Tertiary or Permian 40 to 250 million years old, all yielded significant detectable levels of carbon-14 that would conventionally equate to only 30,000 to 45,000 years age for the original trees. Interesting. Similarly, a survey of the conventional radiocarbon journals resulted in more than 40 examples of supposedly ancient organic materials, including limestones, that contain carbon-14 as reported by leading laboratories. That was the reason I wanted to stop real quick. I just kind of wanted to point out, okay, the word strata, right? I went ahead and Googled it, and it says a layer or series of layers of rocks in the ground, right? So the strata for a tree would be the layers of the tree, right? We're here. So yeah, that's what they were using. They looked at the trees because, of course, trees have carbon in them. We already touched on the plants and how they all coincide, and we're one, right? We live together, right? So they measured the tree, and the tree actually showed that couldn't have been, the millions of years couldn't have been found, right? But then also it shows that the 30 to 40,000, right? But then keep in mind that we already touched on the fact that the numbers that you will see in these things will be 10 times what you will see today. So that 30 to 45,000 could very well be 3 to 400 to 4,500, right? Moving on. Similarly, a survey of the conventional radiocarbon journals resulted in more than 40 examples of supposedly ancient organic materials. I'm sorry, I read that already. Please forgive me. Sheesh. Samples were then taken from 10 different coal layers that, according to the evolutionists, represent different time periods in a geological column. I hate these words, boy. Sheesh. Cenozoic, Mesozoic, and Paleozoic. The rate group obtained these 10 coal samples from the U.S. Department of Energy Coal Sample Bank from samples collected from major coal fields across the United States. The chosen coal samples, which dated millions to hundreds of millions of years old based on standard evolution time estimates, all contained measurable amounts of 14C. In all cases, careful precautions were taken to eliminate any possibility of contamination from other sources, right? Samples in all three time periods display significant amounts of 14C. This is a significant discovery since the half-life of 14C is relatively short, right? Keep that in mind. You got to keep that in mind. They're trying to date this stuff millions of years old, and at best, if they were starting on a sure foundation, they could go back 80,000 years according to the AMS machine, right? It's all in the article. You know what I'm saying? You got to keep all the nuggets together and put it in the, it's like a puzzle, right? It's to the honor of the king, the high the matter, right? Hallelujah. This is the significant discovery since, half-life. There should be no detectable 14C left, right? After about 100,000 years. So the furthest back they could go is 100,000 years. That's it. The average 14C estimate age for all the layers from these three time periods were approximately 50,000 years, which, again, times 10, divided by 10%, that'll be 5,000 years. However, using a more realistic pre-flood 14C 12C ratio, that age to about 5,000 years. Oh, okay, they did it for you. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. These results indicate that the entire geologic column is less than 100,000 years old and could be much younger. This confirms the Bible and challenges the evolutionary idea of a long geologic age, right? So the one that should be receiving the scrutiny, the microscope, is not the word. It's not our creator, bro. It is these people that are trying to put this anti in you about our creator, right? The facts constantly go back to the fact that we are creation. That's what it is. You feel me? And I don't know why is that so hard to understand or grasp or want, because he is good. You understand that? Okay, let me go on and put my soapbox out real quick. Well, you know what? I think I should finish it. No, put my soapbox out real quick. You understand that according to what I find on a daily, what I've been looking into and what he's given me, right? What he's presented before me to dive in and go through and work through, time and time again, we find that he is true. That's historically, that's scientifically, right? These are the two things people use to then discredit him, but in them both you find him, right? I actually have a video on YouTube, and it talks about our creator is the Bible historical and scientific, and yes, it is very much so, bro. I go into a couple different things, such as giants, what our skin is made of, the Tower of Babylon, the people in the book, the nation. Bro, it's so many different topics, bro, that all roads lead to Yahuwah. You know what I'm saying? So if you're going to question something, question the person trying to put a wedge between you and your creator, because he is true. You know what I'm saying? What y'all fail to realize is just as true as he is. He create, the devil exists, and the devil's job is to get you to go to hell, bro. And most of y'all just on the way, like with gasoline draws, man. You feel me? But okay, put my soapbox away. All right. Another noteworthy observation from the rate group was the amount of 14C found in diamonds. Secular science have estimated the age of diamonds to be millions to billions of years old, using other radiometric dating methods. These methods are also based on questionable assumptions and are discussed elsewhere. Because of their hardness, diamonds, the hardest known substance, are extremely resistant to contamination through chemical exchange. Since diamonds are considered to be so old by evolutionary standards, finding any 14C in them would be a strong support for a recent creation. Okay. The Ray group analyzed 12 diamond samples for possible carbon-14 content, right? Similar to the core results, all 12 diamond samples contain detectable but lower levels of 14C. These findings are powerful evidence that coral and diamonds cannot be the millions or billions of years old that evolutionists claim. I mean, hallelujah. Hallelujah. Indeed, these rate findings are detectable. 14C in diamonds have been confirmed independently. Carbon-14 found in fossils at all levels, or all layers of the geologic column in coal and in diamond is evident which confirms the biblical time scale of thousands of years and not billions. You know what I'm saying? Drop mic, fam. You feel me? But in conclusion, right? All radiometric dating methods are based on assumptions about events that happened in the past. If the assumptions are accepted as true, as is typically done in the evolutionary dating process, results can be biased toward a desired age, right? If the reported age given in textbooks and other journals, these evolutionary assumptions have not been questioned. While results inconsistent with long ages have been censored when the assumptions were evaluated and shown faulty, the results support the biblical account of a global flood and young earth. So, Christians, we're not going to say Christians though, we're going to say Bible thumpers should not be afraid of the radiometric dating methods. Carbon-14 dating is really the friend of Bible dumpers, and it supports a young earth. Hallelujah. What a wonderful thing it is to gain understanding, to have understanding and to gain knowledge, right? We're going to read this. The rate scientists are convinced that the popular idea attributed to geologist Charles Levine from nearly 2 centuries ago, the present is the key to the past, is simply not valid for an Earth history of millions or billions of years. An alternative interpretation of the carbon-14 data is that the Earth experienced a global flood catastrophe which laid down most of the rocks, strata, which is the layers, right, and fossils. Whatever the source of the carbon-14, its presence in nearly every sample tested worldwide is a strong challenge to an ancient age. Carbon-14 data is now firmly on the side of the young Earth view of history. With that, man, I say shalom. And one more time before I go. Hallelujah.